A single siren pierced the silent early morning air as the blue and white Philadelphia police cruiser skidded to a halt outside an abandoned brick building. Tension rippled through the air like a distant thunderstorm, awaiting its moment to unleash. Inside the cruiser, Officer Ronald Hastings exhaled a cloud of frustration and disdain. He'd just received word that a Federal Bureau of Investigation agent was en route. Not just any agent, a black female agent named Alicia Carter. He scoffed, already prejudging her abilities solely by the color of her skin. Little did he know, the scene was set for a seismic collision of biases and truths that would rattle the entire police department and the FBI alike. The day Agent Alicia Carter boarded a flight from Washington, D.C. to Philadelphia, she sensed an unusual tension underlying her assignment. For weeks, rumors had circulated through her department at the J. Edgar Hoover building about a local police unit struggling with internal biases and allegations of misconduct. A new spate of crimes, particularly ones targeting minority communities, had made national headlines, prompting the FBI to intervene. Alicia was chosen to lead a delicate task force of federal agents, a testament to her hard-earned reputation for fairness, integrity, and resolute calm under pressure. Alicia had grown up in an impoverished neighborhood in Atlanta, knowing firsthand the sting of racism and the ways it could fester in seemingly ordinary people. She'd lost a close childhood friend to gun violence, and the local police had barely investigated the case. That memory drove her to rise through the ranks, vowing to be the kind of law enforcement official who upheld justice for everyone, no matter their background. Her superiors often spoke of her poise and determination. In Philadelphia, she was expected to bring exactly that spirit, unflinching, unbiased leadership, combined with a tenacity that refused to let any injustice slip by. As the plane touched down at Philadelphia International Airport, her phone buzzed with an official greeting text from the local FBI field office. They informed her that a liaison from the Philadelphia Police Department would be waiting. Her contact's name was Officer Ronald Hastings, someone known for a mixed record of valiant rescues and questionable stops in minority neighborhoods. No one in the FBI office gave her more detail. Perhaps they didn't want to prejudice her view. But in the pit of her stomach, Alicia felt a slight twist of apprehension. Whether or not this assignment would lead to real change depended on the local officer's openness and her ability to navigate a new environment riddled with its own social tensions. Stepping off the plane, Agent Carter adjusted her slim-fitting blazer, her FBI credentials discreetly clipped to her belt. She knew the effect her arrival would have on people one of immediate surprise. More than once, local cops had assumed the FBI agent would be a tall, middle-aged white man in a standard-issue suit. The prejudice was so deeply ingrained that the truth often came as a shock. But Alicia had grown used to it. She wielded their misguided assumptions as a kind of silent power. She made her way through the airport terminal, scanning the crowd for any sign of a uniformed or plainclothes police officer. A tall, broad-shouldered man stood near baggage claim, a police badge gleaming on his belt. He carried himself with the upright posture of someone who believed he owned the space around him. Before Alicia could introduce herself, he strode up, his expression disconcertingly blank. "You're Agent Carter?" he asked, his tone laced with skepticism. His cold blue eyes flicked briefly over her, as if double-checking to make sure she wasn't someone's assistant. She flashed a polite smile. "That's right. And you must be Officer Ronald Hastings." He nodded curtly, but didn't offer his hand. The tension was obvious enough to cut with a knife, making passing travelers glance at them nervously. Alicia tried to keep her tone friendly as she asked about the crime scene she'd been sent to investigate, but Hastings's replies were curt, borderline dismissive. Every few minutes, he'd slip a scornful comment about the feds meddling or question whether she had real experience with homicide cases. He seemed not to care that she had an impeccable record. During the brief drive to the local precinct, she noticed how Hastings steered the conversation to highlight how outsiders wouldn't understand Philadelphia's unique challenges. He never explicitly referenced her race, but his words carried an undertone that made it impossible for her to ignore. She tried to diffuse the tension by calmly referencing her years investigating gang violence and drug trafficking across multiple major cities. Yet, every piece of her professional history seemed to irritate him further. By the time they reached the precinct, Elisha was certain of one thing: she had an uphill battle on her hands, and Officer Hastings would be the first major hurdle. The precinct building sat on a corner in North Philadelphia, with tall iron-barred windows and a fading facade that spoke of decades of civic service. As Elisha stepped inside, the stale odor of old paperwork, sweat, and cheap coffee greeted her like a worn-out policeman's handshake. Officers buzzed around, some focusing on phone calls, others typing away at dusty computer stations, while a group of uniformed rookies chatted in hushed tones near the coffee machine. Hastings led her straight to Captain Eleanor Murphy's office. Captain Murphy was an older woman in her 50s, hair pulled back in a severe bun, eyes ringed by tired lines that hinted at years spent mediating departmental conflicts and chasing down criminals. She stood as they entered, offering Elisha a warm handshake that provided a welcome break from Hastings's frosty reception. "Agent Carter, we've been expecting you," Captain Murphy said, a gentle smile momentarily chasing away the weariness in her eyes. "We truly appreciate the FBI's assistance." The captain proceeded to outline the case. A pattern of violence in the predominantly black neighborhoods of West and North Philadelphia had led to 4 murders in under 2 weeks. The victims varied in age and background, but each was found with a cryptic symbol burned into a piece of clothing near the body. Local investigators suspected a white supremacist group, particularly because of hate-filled graffiti found at one of the crime scenes. Elisha listened attentively, taking notes on a small pad. As the captain spoke, Hastings leaned back against a wall, arms folded, occasionally rolling his eyes or giving a faint, disbelieving snort. His body language screamed, "I don't believe you can handle this." But the fact that the murders carried a possible racial motive made the situation even more sensitive, and Elisha knew her perspective could be invaluable. When Captain Murphy finished, she beckoned Hastings over. "Officer Hastings, I'm assigning you as Agent Carter's point of contact. Make sure she has everything she needs." Murmurs floated through the office, as if the room itself recognized the tension. Hastings glowered but managed a stiff nod. Elisha met his gaze steadily, determined not to back down. This was an official assignment, and she wasn't here for personal drama, or so she thought. Little did she know how personal things would become, and how much they would test her resolve. By the afternoon, Elisha and Hastings had visited 2 crime scenes. The first was in a narrow alleyway behind a convenience store, a place littered with broken bottles, used syringes, and scattered pieces of cardboard that served as makeshift shelters for the homeless. The victim, a 23-year-old black college student named Deshaun Perry, had been found there late at night, a piece of charred cloth etched with a hateful slur left near his body. Alicia's stomach churned at the sight, not because this was the first time she'd seen a homicide, far from it, but because the cruelty behind it felt deeply personal. At the second scene, the home of a middle-aged convenience store clerk who had emigrated from Ghana, Elisha saw the same hateful symbol carved into the victim's living room wall. Hastings watched her reactions closely but said little. When he did speak, it was often to imply that maybe these folks were mixed up in gang activity, or maybe it was a deal gone wrong. Each insinuation delivered with a casual shrug seemed to disregard the explicit racial overtones. Elisha found herself biting back sharp replies, focusing on evidence gathering instead. They questioned several neighbors. Most were tight-lipped, fearing retaliation. One older woman, Miss Robinson, wrung her hands anxiously on her porch. "I've lived here for 40 years, she said in a trembling voice. "We've had crime, sure, but nothing so hateful. People spray ugly graffiti, but this? Murder? It feels like a storm is coming." Hastings made little effort to reassure her. Instead, he glanced at his watch, muttering about having to get back to the precinct. Elisha offered Miss Robinson a comforting nod, promising the FBI would do everything possible to bring the killer or killers to justice. Back in the police cruiser, Hastings gripped the steering wheel, ignoring Elisha's attempts to discuss the case's direction. Finally, she confronted him. "You don't believe these are hate crimes? The evidence is right in front of us." "I believe a lot of things," Hastings replied curtly, "and I believe you all from the Bureau sometimes jump to the easiest narrative." "Easiest narrative?" she echoed in disbelief. 4 black victims in under 2 weeks, all left with obvious racial markings. "How can you ignore that?" His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "I'm not ignoring anything, Agent Carter, but this is my city, and I know how these streets work." His tone dripped with condescension, as if her experiences in multiple cities amounted to nothing compared to his turf knowledge. In that moment, Elisha realized Hastings would fight her every step of the way, but she also sensed something deeper, like he was grappling with his own demons. That possibility, however faint, would keep her from dismissing him entirely. Sometimes the most vitriolic people needed the greatest show of empathy to overcome their biases. But empathy alone wouldn't solve these murders, and she refused to stand by while he let his prejudice overshadow the investigation. The tension between Elisha and Hastings escalated on the second night, when the captain insisted they attend a small community meeting in West Philadelphia. Held in the basement of a local church, the meeting aimed to address rising concerns among residents about the spate of hate-fueled murders. The church basement was dimly lit, with metal folding chairs arranged in rows. A mixture of elderly churchgoers, young activists, and local business owners assembled, forming a mosaic of the community's outrage and fear. Pastor Jordan, a tall man with a soothing baritone voice, opened the meeting with a prayer for unity. Then he introduced Elisha and Hastings. Whispers rippled through the crowd. People seemed eager to hear from the FBI, having lost faith in the local authorities' ability or willingness to take racial violence seriously. Elisha stood, microphone in hand. "I'm Agent Elisha Carter from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We're working closely with the Philadelphia Police Department to make sure justice is served." She paused, scanning the crowd. Eyes brimming with worry stared back at her. "I know how personal this feels," she continued, "and I promise I will not rest until these murders are solved." A chorus of weary nods and a few scattered claps responded. Then she passed the microphone to Hastings, who eyed the crowd with caution. He began by touting his years of service and how dedicated the department was to solving the crimes. Almost immediately, a young man in the back, wearing a T-shirt emblazoned with Black Lives Matter, shouted, "Then why haven't you caught them yet? Why do we never see justice around here?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Hastings' face flushed, his jaw tightened as he delivered a stilted response about ongoing investigations and cooperation with the FBI. The temperature in the room soared, fueled by collective frustration. Hastings' body language grew stiffer. He was a man accustomed to control, and losing control in front of a crowd, especially one that he was predisposed to disregard, made him bristle. When the meeting ended, Hastings turned to Elisha with a sneer. "See what you've done? You riled them up with all that talk. They think we're incompetent now." She responded calmly, though her nerves were frayed. "They're scared, Officer Hastings, and they have every reason to be. We need their trust if we're going to find out who's behind these crimes." "Trust," he repeated, as if the word was foreign. "Fine. Then you handle the trust part, and I'll do the real police work." Any attempt at conversation was cut short by the scowl on his face. Alicia felt an ache in her chest, a pang of frustration over the senseless division. Yet beneath his glaring hostility, she sensed something else: guilt, or maybe shame. She couldn't be sure. But she did know one thing: his racism, whether overt or subtle, was not going to deter her from solving these murders and ensuring the community finally received the justice it deserved. Returning to the precinct late that night, Alicia set up a temporary workstation in a corner office that Captain Murphy had arranged. It overlooked a graffiti-strewn side street where sirens wailed into the early hours. The hush inside contrasted with the chaos outside, a dichotomy that mirrored her tense partnership with Hastings. Pinning crime scene photographs on a corkboard, she drew lines connecting them to witness statements and potential suspects. The biggest lead so far: a known extremist group rumored to have a small but dangerous cell in the Philadelphia suburbs. Intelligence reports from Quantico indicated that the group, calling itself True Heritage, had been linked to hate crimes in other states. They were known to mark their territory with a distinctive symbol, eerily similar to what had been found at the crime scenes. The fluorescent lights above hummed as she clicked through her FBI-issued laptop, searching for any additional intel. Outside her office door, Hastings loomed, arms crossed. "Working late?" he asked. She nodded without looking up. "There's a lot to do. I'd appreciate any insight you have on local extremist groups." His lip curled in a half sneer. "I've dealt with some of those punks before. They're just a bunch of wannabes. More bark than bite, except they might be behind 4 murders," Alicia said pointedly. "Their bark has turned lethal." Hastings said nothing, but his posture radiated reluctance. Alicia recognized that his contempt wasn't just about her personally. It likely stemmed from a lifetime of skewed perspectives, exacerbated by the pressure of an FBI presence. Still, she wasn't going to coddle him. "Captain Murphy wants a briefing in the morning," she continued. "We're going to need all the evidence we can gather, especially from local sources." He let out a short, derisive laugh. "We'll see about that." Alicia decided to swallow her frustration. Instead, she extended an olive branch carefully. "Look, Officer Hastings, I'm not the enemy here. We both want the same thing: to catch whoever is doing this. I'm just asking you to put your personal issues aside for the sake of these victims." For a flicker of a moment, his eyes softened, and he seemed to consider her words. But just as quickly, his stoic mask returned. "You do your thing, I'll do mine." Then he turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Alicia to wonder if she'd ever break through the fortress of his prejudice. She sighed, turning her attention back to the laptop screen, determined to push forward whether Hastings cooperated or not. The next morning, Alicia arrived early at the precinct, only to find Hastings already there. He was seated in the briefing room, flipping through a file. A few other detectives milled about, sipping coffee. Captain Murphy stood at the head of a long, battered table, quietly organizing papers. When the briefing began, Alicia stepped forward to present her findings on True Heritage, the extremist group suspected of orchestrating the hate crimes. She detailed their known members, previous convictions in other states, and social media rhetoric that glorified violence against minorities. Some detectives frowned, a few shook their heads, clearly disturbed. Hastings sat in stony silence, occasionally raising an eyebrow. After Alicia concluded, Captain Murphy cleared her throat. "We've received an anonymous tip," she said, glancing at Alicia before continuing. "A local activist claims to have overheard someone bragging about teaching certain people a lesson at a warehouse near the city docks. Could be True Heritage, could be nothing. But we have to follow up." She assigned Alicia and Hastings to check it out. Alicia caught a glimpse of Hastings's reaction, a roll of the eyes and a quick shift of his jaw. Clearly, he didn't relish the idea of being partnered with her for a stakeout, but there was no protest. A direct order from the captain was not open to debate. Later that afternoon, they drove to the warehouse district near the Delaware River. The area was a patchwork of rusted fences, crumbling buildings, and stacks of shipping containers. It was eerily quiet, except for the distant hum of machinery and the occasional screech of seagulls circling overhead. They parked in a discreet spot, out of direct sight. For hours, they watched the warehouse. Alicia carefully jotted notes on any movement, though there was precious little to observe. As dusk fell, Hastings tapped the steering wheel impatiently. Finally, a beat-up truck rolled into view. Two men hopped out, both wearing black jackets emblazoned with the outline of some twisted symbol. Alicia's pulse quickened. She pulled out her camera, snapping photos with a telephoto lens. The men unloaded boxes from the truck and carried them inside. Hastings frowned, leaning forward for a better view. "Can you zoom in on that patch on their jackets?" he asked, in a voice that momentarily dropped its usual edge. She did. Through the camera's viewfinder, she saw the same hateful insignia that had been found scrawled near the murder scenes. This was the break they needed. She felt a flicker of excitement, tempered by the grim knowledge of what these men represented. After documenting their presence, Alicia reached for her phone to text Captain Murphy about backup. Hastings suddenly tensed. "They're looking this way. Duck!" They both sank into the car seats, hearts pounding. Moments later, the men disappeared into the warehouse again. Alicia exhaled. In that tense moment, they shared a fleeting camaraderie, but it vanished the second Hastings shook his head dismissively and muttered, "Just a couple of punks playing dress-up." Alicia bristled. "Dress up? Did you see the symbol? They're definitely affiliated with that extremist group." "Even if they are, it doesn't prove they committed the murders," he retorted, the old hostility creeping back in. "Don't go jumping to conclusions." Sighing, Alicia resumed her watch. If it took all night, she'd gather enough evidence to prove these men were linked to the murders. She refused to let personal conflicts overshadow the mission. But she wondered if Hastings would ever truly see the gravity of the situation, or if his deep-seated biases would forever blind him to the truth, staring them in the face. The stakeout yielded enough circumstantial evidence to warrant a closer look at the men and their warehouse operations. Captain Murphy approved an undercover operation, with Alicia leading the infiltration. She'd slip into a local bar rumored to be a hangout for True Heritage members, hoping to glean more information. 2 nights later, Alicia found herself adjusting a small microphone pinned discreetly under her collar as she stepped into the rusted anchor, a seedy dive near the waterfront. Smoke clouded the air, and the jukebox played a twangy country tune that clashed with the bar's urban setting. Hastings sat outside in an unmarked vehicle, listening in through an earpiece. Another detective was perched at a table in the corner, ready to back her up if things went south. Alicia ordered a soda, hoping to avoid standing out with a glaringly non-alcoholic choice. A gruff bartender eyed her suspiciously. "Haven't seen you around before," he said, wiping a grimy rag across the countertop. "What brings you here?" "Just looking for a bit of excitement," she replied, trying to adopt a casual tone. She leaned in, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Heard there's a real crowd here some nights. You know, those who appreciate certain traditions." The bartender's expression flickered. He clearly recognized the code words she was hinting at. "Might be some folks who come through," he said, feigning nonchalance. "Depends who's asking." Alicia was about to answer when a burly man wearing a baseball cap, emblazoned with the same hateful insignia, approached the bar. His presence made her heart flutter with anxious energy. She had to be cautious, but also needed to push just enough to invite conversation. She pivoted subtly, casually sipping her soda. The man's eyes found her, curious and slightly suspicious. "You a new face?" he asked, voice gruff. She nodded. Came in from out to state. Heard I could find like-minded folks around here." He watched her carefully. The tension felt razor-thin, as if one wrong word would break the charade. Finally, he jerked his head toward a table. "Sit. Let's talk." A swirl of relief mixed with dread filled Elisha as she followed him. Over the next hour, they danced around the subject of the murders, referencing cleansing the area and sending a message. The man didn't explicitly confess, but his words were enough to suggest true heritage involvement. Elisha, carefully steering the conversation, gleaned that the group's local leader was a man named Garrett Colt, a name that matched a suspect in FBI databases with a known track record of violent hate crimes. Outside, Hastings listened to every word through the comms. He occasionally spat curses under his breath, surprised by how freely these men talked about their bigoted agendas. He also found himself strangely impressed by Elisha's composure. Though he'd never admit it, hearing her remain calm and persuasive under tension cracked the icy layer of disdain he held. By the time Elisha slipped out of the bar, her heart pounded with adrenaline. She walked down a dark side street, scanning for the unmarked car. Suddenly, footsteps echoed behind her. She tensed, ready to defend herself if needed, but it was Hastings, stepping out of the shadows. For once, his expression wasn't one of contempt. "You handled that well," he said gruffly. The wind rustled in the silence that followed. "Might have gotten us a real lead." Elisha nodded. "I'll debrief with Captain Murphy. We'll put together a plan to raid the warehouse if we can get probable cause." He nodded curtly, shoulders relaxing just a fraction. In that moment, Elisha felt the slightest shift, like a door had cracked open between them. It was small, but it was there. Still, she knew the battle for Hastings's respect was far from won, and the real threat of true heritage loomed closer than ever. The following days brought a whirlwind of coordination between the FBI field office and the Philadelphia Police Department. Alicia's undercover intel was enough to secure a warrant for the warehouse. A specialized task force was formed, half a dozen FBI agents, including Elisha, and a select team of local officers, led by Captain Murphy. On the morning of the planned raid, the team gathered in a conference room for a final briefing. A large satellite image of the warehouse district was displayed on a projector screen. Elisha pointed to the building's layout: two main entrances, one on the front, another through a loading dock. Possible exits included several windows and a fire door. Surveillance suggested 6 to 8 suspects could be inside at any given time, possibly armed. Captain Murphy's voice cut through the tension. "Safety is paramount. We have reason to believe these individuals may be armed and extremely dangerous. We proceed with caution and minimal force, unless necessary." "Understood?" A resounding "yes, ma'am," echoed in the room. Officer Hastings stood off to the side, arms folded. Elisha caught his eye. He met her gaze with a faint nod, the unspoken sentiment of "we're in this together now" lingering between them. Dressed in tactical gear, the team approached the warehouse at dawn. Fog hovered over the ground, mingling with the industrial smells of oil and rust. Elisha's heart thumped. She'd done high-risk raids before, but the weight of potential racial violence and a suspect who might be behind 4 brutal murders made the stakes feel higher. She positioned herself near the front entrance with 2 agents, while Hastings led a small group around the back to the loading dock. A battering ram struck the front door, splintering the wood. The team burst in, weapons at the ready. Yells of "FBI, police, put your hands up," reverberated off the cavernous walls. Inside, the main room was cluttered with wooden crates and metal shelving, forming a makeshift labyrinth. Figures scattered in every direction. Gunshots rang out, echoing in the gloom. Elisha ducked behind a crate as bullets whizzed overhead. One suspect, a man in a black jacket, sprinted for a side exit. She chased after him, radioing his location. In a flash, the man spun around and fired. She dropped to a knee, returning a single controlled shot that hit the wall near him. The suspect, shaken, fell to the ground, his weapon clattering aside. Meanwhile, Hastings and his group had cornered two men trying to escape through the loading dock. A brief but intense firefight left one suspect injured and the other surrendering on the spot. Hastings found himself face to face with a man whose jacket bore the same vile symbol from the murder scenes. The man sneered, spitting a racial slur. Rage flared in Hastings's eyes, but he held his composure, cuffing the suspect. Elisha advanced further into the warehouse until she reached a small office in the back. She kicked the door open to find Garrett Colt himself, the rumored leader, huddled over a laptop, frantically erasing data. He lunged for a gun on the desk, but she was quicker, slamming him against the wall. Colt spat at her. "Traitor to your race, woman. You'll pay." For a heartbeat, the echo of her own childhood fears and the memory of a friend lost to racist violence welled within her. But she shoved those emotions aside, cuffing Colt with a firm hand. "I'm FBI, and you're under arrest," she said, her voice steady. In the aftermath, the team secured the warehouse. The suspects were disarmed, laptops and documents seized. A hush fell over the building as backup units arrived, the air heavy with dust and the acrid tang of spent gunpowder. Slowly, the weight of what they'd accomplished settled in. They had disrupted a cell of dangerous extremists. Emerging into the pale morning light, Elisha spotted Hastings escorting his suspects to a waiting police van. He caught her eye. For a moment, a flicker of respect passed between them, but just as quickly he looked away, as if still uncertain how to reconcile what he felt. Elisha quietly understood. Changing a worldview built on prejudice doesn't happen overnight, no matter how heroic or eye-opening the circumstances might be. The arrests made headlines. Joint FBI police operation cripples white supremacist cell in Philadelphia. Local communities breathed a cautious sigh of relief. Still, investigators had yet to prove conclusively that Garrett Colt and his followers were responsible for the 4 murders. Though the extremist group's online postings boasted about ridding the city of impurities, the evidence needed to hold up in court required a watertight chain of proof. Back at the precinct, Elisha and Hastings found themselves once again shoved together by circumstance. They shared an office while piecing through the seized electronics, thousands of files, social media chats, and encrypted documents. It was meticulous, draining work. Tensions simmered. Hastings grew impatient with the process, preferring direct interrogations. Elisha stressed the importance of methodical analysis. "Look at this," Elisha said one afternoon, gesturing at a decrypted folder on a laptop. The name read Operation Cleansing. Inside were files containing lists of black community leaders, local activists, and specific references to those who don't belong here. Elisha's heart sank at the scale of hatred. This proves they were planning more attacks. Hastings scanned the screen, lips pressed thin. "I knew there were extremist groups. I just didn't think they'd plan things like a military operation." His voice faltered, an unsettling realization creeping in. They exchanged a glance that carried unspoken weight. The city had been on the brink of more violence, possibly more murders. Elisha turned back to the files, searching for any mention of the 4 murder victims. After half an hour, she found something, a set of cryptic notes referencing Phase 1 targets. The addresses matched 3 of the victims' residences. "That's it," she breathed, adrenaline spiking. "We might have our direct link." Before she could continue, Hastings's phone buzzed. He answered, then swore under his breath. "Another body found," he muttered, eyes flashing with dread. "Same M.O." Elisha stared. "But we have Colt and his men in custody." "I know," Hastings said, grabbing his jacket. "Either we miss someone, or we're dealing with a copycat." Alicia's mind raced. If Colt was behind bars, it meant the possibility of a second suspect or an entirely separate operation. The prospect was chilling. She snatched her own jacket, silently steeling herself for yet another horrifying crime scene. They arrived at a modest row home in North Philadelphia, where the body of a middle-aged black woman lay in her living room. The hateful symbol was again left behind. Hastings paced the perimeter, face pale. "This doesn't make sense," he mumbled. "We got Colt. We got his entire cell, or at least most of them." Alicia knelt beside the victim, her heart heavy. She looked up at Hastings, feeling an unspoken bond in that moment of collective dismay. "Then there's someone else out there," she said. "Someone just as dangerous." Hastings locked eyes with her. For the first time, there was no malice, no sneer, only a somber awareness of the peril overshadowing them all. "We've got to find them," he said. Fast. Back at the precinct, chaos erupted. Reporters hounded the station, demanding answers about the latest murder. The community, already on edge, seethed with anger and fear. Captain Murphy convened an emergency meeting. Investigators poured through records of everyone affiliated with Colt's group, trying to identify who could still be at large. Alicia spread mugshots across a table, each face representing a known associate of Colt. Hastings hovered beside her, scanning each image intently. They cross-referenced them with names from the newly discovered files. A pattern emerged. One name repeated in multiple places: Eric Doughty, a recent recruit who had posted violent rhetoric online, but no one had seen him at the warehouse during the raid. "That could be our missing link," Alicia said, tapping on the photo of a young, wiry man with a buzz cut. "He might have been part of Colt's Phase 1. If so, he's dangerous and still free." Hastings grimaced. "Let's get an APB out on him." He paused, turning to Alicia. "We'll check every known address, friends, family, anywhere he might hide." They spent the next 48 hours chasing leads. Some were dead ends, an abandoned trailer, a vacant lot. At each spot, Alicia and Hastings found more hateful graffiti, more signs that someone nursed a lethal grudge. The dynamic between them shifted. Gone was the open hostility. In its place, a tense, grudging camaraderie formed, bound by the urgency of stopping a killer. But the spectre of racism still hung in the air, an unspoken presence that had yet to be confronted head-on. Late one night, they slumped in the precinct's break room, exhaustion etched on their faces. Hastings gulped lukewarm coffee, grimacing. "I've seen a lot in this job, but this, I don't know." He shook his head. "It makes me sick. Killing people just because of—" He stopped, words failing him. Alicia nodded. "Because they're black," she finished gently. "That's the ugly truth we're dealing with." He stared into his coffee mug. "You know, I wasn't always this. I don't hate people for their skin color," he muttered defensively, as if anticipating judgment. "I've just seen so much crime in these neighborhoods. It's hard not to form certain opinions." Alicia set her cup down. "That's the problem, Hastings. When you lump an entire community into a negative category, you're feeding the same kind of prejudice that leads to this sort of violence. It might be less extreme, but it's all rooted in the same thinking. They're different, so they must be criminals." He looked up, his expression conflicted. For a moment, he opened his mouth to protest, but a flicker of realization crossed his face. The unspoken truth, his own biases, were smaller echoes of the hateful worldview fueling these murders. He swallowed hard. "Maybe you're right," he whispered, barely audible. It's complicated." "It doesn't have to be," Alicia said softly. "People are individuals. Being black or brown or anything else doesn't make someone a criminal. We're all just human. We have families, dreams, fears. It's the uniform we wear that's supposed to protect those differences, not exploit them." Silence settled, broken only by the hum of the overhead lights. Finally, Hastings exhaled, something resembling remorse flickering in his gaze. The conversation ended there, but Elisha sensed a tide shifting. Whether or not it would last, she couldn't be certain, but at least, for now, there was a glimmer of understanding. The search for Eric Doherty intensified. Elisha enlisted the help of the FBI's cybercrimes division to track any online activity he might have engaged in. The breakthrough came when a cryptic message appeared on a notorious extremist forum. Someone with Doherty's known alias bragged about finishing what was started, referencing the murders in chilling detail. This digital breadcrumb led the task force to a run-down neighborhood on the outskirts of Philadelphia. An anonymous tipster reported seeing a man matching Doherty's description entering a condemned row house. The building itself was a decrepit shell, windows boarded, roof half collapsed. Elisha and Hastings arrived with a squad of local officers just before dawn. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and rotting wood. Moving quietly, they surrounded the building. Hastings signaled 2 officers to take the back while he and Elisha crept through the front. Each step on the sagging floorboards threatened to give them away. Inside, the smell worsened, a nauseating mix of mold and stale air. The walls bore the same hateful symbols they'd seen at the murder scenes. Elisha's heart pounded. If Doherty was here, he might have booby-trapped the place. They advanced, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Suddenly, they heard frantic footsteps upstairs. They stormed the rickety staircase, guns drawn. Elisha's mind raced, each second feeling like an eternity. The second floor was a hallway lined with broken doors. At the far end, a door slammed. Then came the sound of hurried scrapes, as if someone was shoving furniture against it. Hastings gestured for Elisha to take the left side of the hallway. He positioned himself on the right, lips pressed into a thin line. They inched closer to the final door. Hastings kicked it in with one swift motion, splinters flying. On the other side, Eric Doherty clutched a handgun, wild-eyed, cornered among toppled chairs. "Drop your weapon," Hastings barked, training his gun on Doherty's chest. Doherty's gaze flicked between them, pure hatred twisting his features. He let out a shrill laugh, raising the gun. Elisha's heart thundered. She saw his finger tighten on the trigger. With a sharp crack, Hastings fired first. The bullet struck Doherty's shoulder, knocking him backward. The gun clattered to the ground. Elisha rushed forward, kicking it away. Blood spread across Doherty's shirt as he glared at them with unmitigated spite. "This city is ours," he hissed, voice ragged. "You can't stop us." Hastings moved in with handcuffs. For a moment, he stared into the eyes of a man who embodied the worst of humanity's prejudices. Then, almost as if repulsed, he twisted Doherty's arm behind his back and snapped on the cuffs. Elisha secured the scene, calling for paramedics. As they led Doherty outside, early morning light filtered through the boarded windows, illuminating the hateful symbols scrawled on the walls. For Elisha, it felt like bringing something twisted and festering into the open air, exposing it to the scrutiny of justice. And if she wasn't mistaken, she saw something akin to relief in Hastings's tense posture. Maybe, just maybe, confronting such vile hatred firsthand had pried open his eyes a bit wider. The arrest of Eric Doherty was a triumphant moment for the task force, and swift forensic analysis connected him to crucial evidence at the latest murder scene. Over the next few days, interrogations revealed that he'd acted in coordination with Colt's group but had maintained a degree of autonomy. He bragged about finishing the job when Colt got arrested, proving his twisted loyalty. As the legal machinery took over, Elisha found herself standing in front of a memorial mural in a West Philadelphia neighborhood. The mural depicted a collage of the 4 murder victims' faces, surrounded by doves and bright geometric shapes. Painted by local artists, it had quickly become a gathering point for mourning families, activists, and community members seeking solace. She stood there, quietly absorbing the collective grief and resilience the mural represented. Footsteps approached behind her. She turned to see Hastings, hands in his pockets. He gazed up at the mural, eyes flicking over each lost life. "I heard you were here," he said softly. "Thought I'd come by." Elisha nodded, not entirely sure what to say. They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of city life swirling around them, cars passing, children laughing in the distance, a sense of normalcy trying to reclaim the streets. Hastings cleared his throat. "You know, I've been on the force for almost 15 years. Seen a lot of ugliness, a lot of crime. I told myself I was just being realistic about who the criminals were. But maybe I was just," he trailed off, searching for the right words. She offered a gentle prompt. "Maybe you were seeing the world through a limited lens?" He exhaled. "Yeah, something like that." He looked at the mural again. "When we found these victims, I felt anger, like how dare someone do this in my city. But I never stopped to consider the real reason behind it, pure hate for a community I was supposed to protect." Alicia heard the tremor in his voice. Despite her frustration with him, she also recognized the courage it took to confront one's own prejudice. "You're doing it now," she said softly. "That's a start." He glanced at her, eyes full of complicated emotions, regret, perhaps a hint of shame, and maybe even a flicker of gratitude. "I owe you an apology. More than that, probably. But let me start there." A wave of relief flowed through Elisha. This acknowledgement, no matter how late, was a step toward healing, not just for Hastings, but possibly for every interaction he'd have going forward, especially with the community he served. "Thank you," she replied, voice thick with a swirl of empathy and exhaustion. They watched as a group of young students approached the mural, placing flowers at its base. The sight was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Hastings spoke again. "You're different than I expected, Carter. Stronger than I gave you credit for." Elisha smiled, a weary but genuine smile. "I'm just doing my job," she said, "like you." Yet they both knew it went deeper than that. In the face of hatred, doing the job meant taking a stand, risking everything to uphold justice for those targeted because of who they were. It was a solemn commitment that transcended badges and titles, and in that shared understanding, they forged something resembling respect, fragile yet real. With Doherty behind bars and Colt awaiting trial, the immediate wave of hate crimes subsided. The community began to reclaim the streets, hosting vigils, neighborhood gatherings, and talks aimed at bridging gaps between the police and residents. Local media praised the FBI Philadelphia PD task force, shining a spotlight on Alicia Carter's leadership in dismantling the violent cell. Yet, despite this progress, Alicia felt the weight of a city still grappling with deeply rooted divides. One afternoon, she was invited to speak at a community roundtable hosted by the Urban League of Philadelphia. The event aimed to address systemic issues like racial profiling, police violence, and mistrust of law enforcement. The invitation came with a specific request: "Please bring Officer Hastings." She asked him hesitantly, half expecting him to refuse. To her surprise, he said yes. The two arrived at a small community center in West Philadelphia, where a modest auditorium was filled with activists, local politicians, clergy, and residents. An air of curiosity mixed with lingering skepticism greeted them, particularly Hastings, whose reputation for rough, racially charged policing preceded him. Seated at a long table in front of the audience, Alicia and Hastings joined a panel that included civil rights lawyers, a local pastor, and a representative from the mayor's office. The discussion was candid, sometimes heated. A mother tearfully recounted how her teenage son had been stopped and frisked multiple times without cause. An older man, once a victim of police brutality, demanded accountability and transparency. Alicia spoke passionately about her experiences across different cities, emphasizing the need for systemic reform, better training, and community engagement. She received polite applause. Then all eyes turned to Hastings. He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. For a moment, he seemed like he might default to excuses or defensive rhetoric. But something in him shifted. "I've worked these streets a long time," he began, voice low, "and I've made my share of assumptions about people. I won't sugarcoat it. Some of those assumptions were wrong and harmful." The room grew noticeably quieter. Hastings continued, speaking about the murders, how he'd witnessed hate up close, and how it made him realize that prejudice was a poison, regardless of its degree. He admitted he had to confront his own biases to serve the community properly. A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. Some looked skeptical, others intrigued. By the time he finished, a tentative applause broke out. It wasn't thunderous, but it wasn't dismissive either. They recognized that, at least on some level, Hastings was trying to change. After the panel, as the audience dispersed, a young black man approached Hastings with a mix of caution and curiosity. "I've seen you around, Officer Hastings," he said. "You were the one who pulled me over last year for a busted taillight. You gave me a really hard time, even though I had my paperwork in order." Hastings's expression tightened, shame touching his features. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, meeting the young man's eyes. "If I could do that day over, I would." The young man nodded. They stood in silence, an unspoken sense of progress, small but tangible, lingering between them. Watching from a short distance, Alicia felt a surge of cautious optimism. True, one apology wouldn't fix the systemic issues or erase years of harm, but it was a step, a human moment of reckoning that could lead to something better, if nurtured properly. In that instance, she knew that sometimes the biggest victories happen not with the clang of a gavel in a courtroom, but in the quiet moments where someone decides to own up to past mistakes and chart a new path forward. With the high-profile investigation winding down and local tensions cooling, the FBI began to transition out of Philadelphia. Many of Alicia's team members had already returned to their home offices. She remained for a few final days to tie up loose ends, finalize reports, and ensure the evidence against Colt and Doherty was airtight for their upcoming trials. On her last night in the city, Alicia found herself in a reflective mood. She decided to visit a small jazz club near Rittenhouse Square, a place recommended by Captain Murphy. The dimly lit venue offered live music that drifted through the night like a soothing balm for weary souls. She settled into a corner table, sipping a club soda and letting the saxophone's warm notes wash over her. To her surprise, Hastings appeared at the entrance, scanning the room until he spotted her. She waved him over. He hesitated a moment, then made his way to her table. "Captain Murphy said, I might find you here," he said, sitting down. The tension that once crackled between them had softened considerably. The old hostility that had defined their partnership was absent. They chatted about the city, the job, the pending trials. Hastings revealed that Colt's group had indeed planned more attacks, but the arrests had effectively dismantled their local network. Alicia noted that communities across Philadelphia were organizing vigilance committees, determined never to let such hate take root again. Eventually, the topic shifted to them, an odd pairing forced together by circumstances but changed by their shared experience. Hastings ran a hand over his short-cropped hair. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how treating people like criminals just because they come from a certain neighborhood or look a certain way is its own form of prejudice. Maybe not as overt as what Colt and Doherty believe, but It's still harmful. Alicia leaned forward, the flicker of candlelight dancing in her eyes. Recognizing that is a major step, she said, do you feel like you can do your job differently now? He sighed. That's the plan. I can't change overnight, but I want to. And I realize part of that means actually getting to know these communities, not just policing them, maybe volunteering at youth programs, attending more community meetings, stuff like that. A slow smile spread across her face. That's good to hear, because it's not just about stopping the bad guys. It's about building trust, showing people they matter. They listened as the jazz band slid into a mellow tune, the melody threading through the conversation. For a brief moment, Alicia allowed herself to feel gratitude for this unexpected development. She'd come to Philadelphia to investigate heinous crimes, only to end up playing a role in shifting at least one officer's perspective. It felt like a victory, albeit a small one, in the ongoing battle against systemic racism. After the set ended, Hastings stood, checking his watch. I should probably get going. Early shift tomorrow. He paused, seeming unsure of himself. Then he extended his hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just weeks prior. Alicia stood as well, shaking his hand with a firm yet warm grasp. No fireworks or grand speeches marked the moment, just two colleagues acknowledging the hard road. They'd traveled together, and the possibility of forging a more just path ahead. She watched him leave, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment fill the space where anger and frustration once lingered. On her final day in Philadelphia, Alicia packed up her temporary office. Captain Murphy hosted a small farewell gathering in the break room, complete with stale donuts and lukewarm coffee. Several detectives offered polite thanks, a few praising her cool-headed leadership and thorough investigative work. Hastings showed up briefly, giving her a respectful nod. As she walked out of the precinct doors for the last time, she was met with bright afternoon sunshine. In her hand, she clutched a copy of her final report, a comprehensive document tying together all the evidence, witness accounts, and suspect statements. Justice for the victims now rested in the hands of prosecutors, judges, and, ultimately, the jury. Still, she felt confident they had built a strong case. Before heading to the airport, Alicia detoured to the row house, where Miss Robinson, one of the early witnesses, lived. She knocked on the door, half expecting no response, but Miss Robinson opened it, surprise and delight illuminating her face. "Agent Carter, I thought y'all were done here." Alicia offered a small smile. "Almost, ma'am. I just wanted to thank you for your help. And to let you know, we've arrested the people responsible for those terrible crimes." Tears glimmered in Miss Robinson's eyes. She reached out, squeezing Alicia's hand. "God bless you, child. And God bless everyone who helped put those devils behind bars." Alicia felt a lump in her throat. The emotional toll on the community had been immense. For them, knowing the suspects were in custody brought a sense of closure, or at least the promise of it. She bid Miss Robinson goodbye, walking away with a lighter heart. Her final stop was that now familiar mural. The paint glistened under the midday sun, the faces of the 4 victims forever memorialized in vibrant color. Someone had added a new inscription at the bottom: "Love overcomes hate." Standing there, Alicia thought about the complexities of prejudice, the pain it inflicted, and the resilience of those determined to fight back. In the distance, she heard the faint echo of a church bell. It was time to go. She checked her phone. Her flight would depart in a few hours. Turning on her heels, she made her way to the waiting car. Though her assignment in Philadelphia was over, the lessons she learned, the importance of confronting racism head-on, the potential for change even in the unlikeliest people, and the strength of a community that refuses to be silenced would resonate with her for a lifetime. Ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up the dramatic tale of how one racist cop, Officer Ronald Hastings, crossed paths with a formidable black female FBI agent, Alicia Carter. Their story began amid tension and prejudice, unfolding through dangerous investigations, unexpected alliances, and a slow, hard-won shift in perspective. It was a collision of worlds that exposed deep-seated biases and a community's unyielding demand for justice. Ultimately, Hastings faced the flaws in his own heart, and Elisha showed us the power of resilience, empathy, and moral courage. If you found this story gripping, full of twists, tension, and a hard-earned glimpse of redemption, please don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more captivating content. Your support helps bring more riveting tales to life, reminding us all that change begins with a single step toward understanding. Thank you for watching,